would like to share with you my story. And as Marco said, I've been at Microsoft a little while. I've actually been here over 34 years, if you include the 9-month contract I did at the beginning. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I wanted to start by going back to the beginning and really tell you kind of how it all started. Full-time, I came into the company in 1989, April of 1989. And I was hired in as a software development engineer in test. So these were technical quality assurance people. And I started on the Windows team. They had just shipped this thing called Windows 2.11. And a team was getting formed. I think there was 12 of us on the team that really produced and did all the testing for the Windows 3.0 product. I owned the software development kit, the SDK, and I did all of the testing and quality assurance on the Windows 3.0 software development kit. And then I worked on Windows 3.1. And then after a couple of years of working in operating systems, I was looking for a change. And so I interviewed with a team that was called AFX. That stood for Application Frameworks. And one of the members of the team was Steven Sinofsky. Some of you may know that name. He was a senior level executive at the company, and he's now off doing other things. But when I interviewed with that team, I interviewed for a position that they had posted, and at the end of the interview, they didn't say anything in the job posting that it was for a manager position, so I didn't think that's what I was interviewing for. And when I were done, they were saying, "Hey, we did great on the interviews. We'd love to have you come on the team, but we need you to be a manager to manage these 2 people." I was like, I wasn't interviewing for a manager position, and I don't want to be a manager. Like it's not on my radar. And they said to me, "Oh, we think you do a really good job." I'm like, it's not what I want to do. That's not what I interviewed for. So no. And they said, listen, we really need you to do this. So tell you what, do it for 6 months. And if you don't like it, if it doesn't work out, you can switch to being an individual contributor. I'm like, I can, sort of do that for 6 months and then exit. So really, when I look at it, I was tricked into being a manager. And they sort of bait and switched me on that thing. But it turns out it was amazing, because it was really kind of forced me into discovering that, oh, there's something here that is resonating with me. And I didn't really fully understand it at the time. It would take years to kind of realize it. But I really enjoyed it. I was, I was pretty good at it naturally to start with, and lots to learn still. There's still so much more to learn about managing and caring for people. But so that was sort of the tricked part of my story. But it was really helpful and good part. So when things don't go this is a theme in my story, when things don't go as you expect them to go, often those end up being some of the most amazing and transformational parts of your journey. And that's been my case. And it never feels that way at the time. It's only when kind of looking back and reflecting that I can see the positive and the lowest points of my journey. So I was working on a visual resource editor on this AFX team, which created the first version of MFC, the Microsoft Foundation classes. You might be familiar with these things or not. And our team got merged with the languages team, the team that was working on the C++ compiler. And so they were working on the next version of the compiler. We had a visual resource editor tool, and some marketing person had the idea to take the floppy disks from this was before the internet, floppy disks for the visual resource editor and the floppy disks for the C++ compiler, throw those into a box together. We'd never talked to these teams. There was no integration, and call it Visual C++. And that's a true story. That is how the visual line of products got birthed. And so I was there kind of at the beginning. And then, of course, at that point, we actually started to integrate the products, and that turned into the Visual Studio line of products and the whole visual thing. And so that was what happened there. And that's kind of a fun story that I wanted to tell. But so as I was working on that and working on many different versions in developer division, and developer tools, I ended up developing a brand. And this was not an intentional thing. I think there's an opportunity for people to be very intentional about building the thing that you're known for. We'll call that your brand, your personal brand. But over time, this was happening. And again, it's only upon reflecting back that I realized, oh, this is what was happening. But I kept getting moved to different teams. And the teams weren't particularly functional when I got there. And after I was there for a while, then they would move me to a different team. And the teams would be improving, under my leadership. And so what I realized is that I ended up getting the brand as the guy who fixed broken teams. And again, you go back to that manager and caring for people and looking after them. And that actually, I sort of only half jokingly say that my secret that I will share with all of you, if you promise not to tell anybody else, my secret to fixing broken teams is actually in our manager expectations here at Microsoft now, that is on my board behind me. And it's in this bottom point here, is I actually just cared about the people a little bit. I just paid attention to them a little bit. And again, I'm only half joking when I say, obviously, I have this image of a toolkit with lots of different tools in it. And really the main tool that I was using was I paid attention and cared for the people. And they got better and they got more functional. And so during this season, I was becoming more and more aware of what was most important to me and what energized me, which really led me to a moment in time to be able to create and clarify my passion. And I took the time, and it's not like I woke up one day and the day before I had no idea, and the next day, boom, it came to me, right? Like bits and pieces of this had been building and growing over my career. And this was about 10 to 12 years ago. So, over 2 decades into my career, it took me to really identify my passion. And I love to work with early career folks and help them, maybe accelerate their discovery and clarification of their passions so they can pursue their passion and be intentional about it. But many of you have heard me say this. If you stalk me on LinkedIn, you'll see it right there at the top of my LinkedIn profile. But my passion statement that I wrote down in a statement, it's a powerful thing to do, to put your passion out into the world in written form, turns out, is to create environments where individuals and teams are empowered to learn and grow and realize their full potential. That's my passion statement. It's been the same for 10 years, 12 years. And once I wrote that down, I could now start more intentionally doing things and saying yes to things or saying no to things and focusing my energy. But after gaining that clarity, it wasn't immediately, but shortly after gaining that clarity, something happened. And the organization I was in made a decision that the people that were leading the large organizations in that part of the company, and I was leading a large organization in the company at that point, that those people needed to be the most technical people at the company. That's what the leaders needed to be, was the deepest, most technical. You might say know-it-alls, right? You know the Microsoft story of know-it-alls to learn-it-alls. And that there wasn't a place for me anymore in the organization. Now, it was an interesting sort of shown the door kind of a situation, because, and this is a low point in my story, by the way, kind of, you probably picked up on that, because it wasn't like you've added no value here, and so go find another job. There was a ton of appreciation for all the value that I had added to the organization over the years. It just felt like we don't have any more broken teams to fix, which I would have disagreed with, and so I kind of got a kick out the door. But this is actually a good thing. Again, not at the time, in retrospect, because I am committed to a fault to things. Enneagram number 1, if that means anything to any of you. And so I will commit to things and kind of go down with the ship, and err on the side of what's good for the organization versus what's good for me. And I kind of needed a kick. I had discovered my passion, and I was working to try to pursue that in my own where I was, but I wouldn't have on my own pursued another opportunity. So I actually look back at this kick as a good thing, kind of a kick in the butt to get myself going in my career. And so what that led to was I joined a team called Engineering Excellence. And this was a team that was focusing on helping engineers across the entire company be excellent, as the name implies. And a lot of it was about process, engineering process and tooling. There was a learning aspect of this organization. I was not part of the learning aspect, but now I'm close to a learning team and starting to pick up on my passion. How can I help that effort? And it was company-wide scope, so that was fantastic. And I did a project that was related to gathering data across all of engineering about culture and health of the engineering organizations. And this is what really amplified and sparked kind of a data-informed data and insights and the value of that in me, that I got a chance to explore. So I did that for a couple of years and felt like this is it. Like this is kind of super related to my passion and a great opportunity. And then this happened. And it was September 18th, 2014. I remember the date specifically because it's my wedding anniversary. And this was the day that I and our whole team was pulled into a room. And this was during the season when Microsoft was doing a bunch of downsizing, and our entire organization had been eliminated. And fortunately, unlike some layoffs that are like, you're done today, like, take your stuff and pack, we were all given 60 days to find another spot in the company or would be on the street, be out of a job. Now I, along with thousands of other people, were all looking for another job in the company in a season when they were downsizing. So you can imagine the stress and the challenge that provided. And so that was a super stressful time. And I'm like, what's going on? Like I just got going on really trying to activate and realize my passion in my role and my job, and now this. And literally just a couple days before the 60 days ran out, I did find another job in the company. It was in the Bing team. It wasn't a particularly great fit for me, I thought at the time, but I was super thankful to be employed still. And so I dug in and I was working on Azure DevOps processes for the organization, which I had worked on that product. It wasn't called ADO when I worked on it, but now this is what it was. And helping teams organize their work. And so, it was kind of related to my passion. But one of the things that I worked on was this event that was called Engineering Velocity. It was about how to help engineers work more productively and have a higher velocity. And it was for our division, so our chunk of Microsoft, and other divisions wanted to hold a similar event. And I said, well, rather than duplicate work, why don't we all get together and have a company-wide engineering event that I helped kind of kick off, and now is an annual thing. It's called One ES Day, One Engineering System, and it's focused on engineers and the tools and the process that engineers use. But in the process of doing that, I'm starting to build connections. I'm starting to build relationships with people across the company, and to start thinking about and engaging, again, like I was doing engineering excellence, across the entire system, which started to activate a passion and actually realize that one of my superpower is systemic thinking. It's seeing patterns and connections in large, disparate sets of data and organizations and process, et cetera. And operating in a highly matrixed, highly complex company like Microsoft, this has been super useful to have. And so I see now that what I was doing in that period was building skills that I now use all the time in my work. And so from that, all of a sudden, one day, out of the blue, and when I tell this story, I put this in air quotes, out of the blue, I got a call. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with the image that you're looking at here, this is what telephones used to look like. And those little circles there, you used to put your finger in there and you turn it over for each number. You can look it up on YouTube and see how this works. But anyway, I thought it would be fun to use a super ancient, since I'm kind of ancient, a super ancient telephone. Anyway, I get this call and I say, how would anybody have known to call me about this opportunity if I hadn't put my passion out into the world in written form for people to know about? But they said, hey, Satya wants to reboot the learning effort. That team that was eliminated in 2014 that had a learning team a part of it that went away. The call was, hey, Satya wants to reboot the learning effort for engineers at the company. Would you be interested in building a team from scratch to do that? Now, if you think about my passion statement and this opportunity, there actually couldn't be a more perfect match. So I didn't even have to think for a second about my answer to that question. I immediately said yes, because this role that I'm in now is literally my dream job. I absolutely can't think of any other job that would be better fit for my passion. And I'm incredibly thankful and humbled to be able to say that that's the case. And kind of a fun fact, when I interviewed for this role, the last interviewer who at Microsoft, we call it the as appropriate, they kind of make the final call. My pitch, kind of my closing pitch for why I should get the job, or just my thought at the end, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, I said, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I don't have any formal training in learning whatsoever. What I do have is a passion for learning for myself and for other people. I know my customer, let's call the engineers that we serve for learning at my customer, because I've grown up in this company and studied them and been one and interacted. And I want to be data informed based on some of the data stuff I've done earlier. I want to be data informed about everything I do and make it up as I go along. And it was years later that someone pointed out that by saying I didn't know it all, by saying I don't know what I'm doing, I was demonstrating a growth mindset and a willingness to learn about learning. And that was actually the perfect thing to say. So that was sort of interesting that I was demonstrating what I'm trying to create for the whole company in approaching the job in a very sort of growth mindset way. So I'm in this, I got to build a team from scratch. You know, all that fixing broken teams that I'd done, I'd always grown teams, shrunk them, reorganized them, but I'd never been handed a bunch of empty positions and been able to build a team from scratch. So that was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Like, how does that work? How do you craft out of nothing a brand new team with tons of ambiguity about what you're supposed to be doing? Again, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, which actually, you know, I wasn't tied down to how learning has always been done. I was just making it up as I went along. So that was kind of a good thing. It allowed me to experiment and try some things. But I was able to craft a team with lots of different capabilities on it, including learning, by the way, right? Some of you have met Amber. She's talked before at Technicon. She actually was at that introductory meeting, Marco. You know, she's got a PhD in learning sciences. So I'm not an expert, but I surrounded myself with some folks that know about learning. And it was just an amazing opportunity to build a team from scratch. But this wasn't without a struggle. Okay, so I'm in this great job. It's my dream job. But initially, especially, this was early. So 6 years ago, almost to the day, like I got that call I talked about in October of 2016. So that was just almost exactly 6 years ago. And Satya was still pretty new in role. This whole growth mindset thing and shifting the company from know-it-alls was in early days. I mean, we're still in the process there, but you know, we're certainly different today than we were 6 years ago. And it was hard to get anybody's attention, any engineering leader's attention around learning. We got stuff to do, we got features to ship, we got bugs to fix and short-term thinking. And plus, we were new. Brand new team, you know, I had a few relationships, but there's a big company, a lot of people who didn't know me. And what I discovered is that engineers and engineering leaders, they sort of ignore anything new for 2 years, because we reorganize and another initiative and another ask of thinking differently or working differently is going to come around. And a lot of these folks have been leading engineering for a long time. So like, I'm not going to spin on a dime and then you go away and then someone else comes along and it's super disruptive. So I'm just going to ignore you for 2 years. And if you're still around 2 years from now, then I'll start paying attention to you. And this was a hypothesis I had, and I kid you not, it was almost 2 years to the day that all of a sudden people started listening and paying attention to us. So that was an interesting struggle at the beginning, kind of pushing a rock uphill in our work. But we would find a few people who were willing, and we would do experiments, and we would gather data, and we were building our experience as we went. And then as we wind the clock forward to more recently, a couple of years ago, I feel like we reached a tipping point in all of this, where a combination of the amount of data and insights that we had is really the language, the love language that engineering leaders and engineers pay attention to, right? If you don't have data to back it up, no matter how convicted you are or convincing you are, if you don't have the data, it's a pretty weak. It's pretty weak in their mind. And so data was key to really getting people's attention and having them say, all right, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to buy into what you're saying because you're proving it to me with data. But also the pandemic, I think, has been an interesting dynamic in people's willingness to focus on and pay attention to learning. And my hypothesis is that that's related to people focusing on their wellness. And certainly you have your physical health that people are worried about, but also your mental health and your career health and your relevance and this shift and amplification of businesses realizing that we have to really care for and pay attention to our people and what their passions are to take care of them. And I think the combination of kind of having the data and the insights and the pandemic has really shifted the tide of leaders' willingness and energy that they put into focusing on learning for their organizations, et cetera. And so as far as today's state of where I'm at, and then I'm going to talk about the kind of looking forward next, our team, because we're small, Marco said we're small, I have 4 people reporting to me. We don't build training. We don't run learning programs directly. We enable the vast number of people out in the ecosystem and in the business who are doing those things. So it's not a fully centralized thing. It's kind of a hub and a spoke, and the spokes are within the business. And we focus through our data and insights and connections, enabling all of the learning activity that's happening out within the business and across the company. I use a light bulb, and this is not an uncommon, lots of people use a light bulb for learning, but when you think about our definition of what learning is, a lot of engineers and a lot of people will say training is learning. Training is an activity, a really important and interesting activity, but nonetheless, it's an activity. Learning is an outcome. What kind of an outcome? A lasting change in behavior is the simplest definition that I use. It's having knowledge that you didn't have before. It's seeing something that you didn't see before. It's illuminating a truth that you didn't understand before. It's the ability to do something, have a skill to apply that you weren't able to do before. So the light bulb, in shining light on the possibilities and the abilities and the knowledge, I think is a beautiful metaphor for learning and matches really nice with our definition. And you've probably heard me at some point share our learning strategy as a company. It's got 3 pillars. It starts with fostering a culture of learning. It's prerequisite, it's foundational to then enable the employees to build skills and capabilities. But why? Why do we care? Why does the business care? Well, when employees build more capabilities and skills, learning, it fuels greater innovation, driving business growth. So it's good for the people because they're staying relevant. It's good for the business because it stays relevant. And the more leaders are understanding this and we're using data to prove to them that this is actually the case, the more they're ready to lean in and say, help me build a learning culture, help me build an organization that is learning and growing all the time. And so that's where we focus a lot of our energy, not necessarily on the learning programs, but on the leaders and the managers, their mindset and the environment that they create. So what am I excited about? What am I looking forward to? Where are we investing now for the future? I'll end here, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. I mean, data and insights continues to be at the center of what we're doing. We continue to gain new and interesting insights about what the, for example, what the root cause that's behind our struggles with learning culture and people not feeling like they have time to learn. Because what we've discovered over a couple of years of trying to give people more time is that time is actually not the answer to the time challenge. The answer is the organizational priority and the leader's mindset about learning, which then of course results in not having enough time because we're short-term focused. Time is the symptom. Fix the symptom with something for that. You have to go to the root cause. And we have a bunch of data and insights to prove this. And so taking that and using that data and storytelling to continue to shift leaders' mindset and their actions to support this culture for learning. Because we all hire really smart people. And if we just give them the environment and enable them, they're going to do the learning. But if we take these really smart, capable, high potential people and just squash them with the environment, you can throw learning resources and training at them all day long, and it's not going to make any difference. That's what we're experiencing here at Microsoft. And so shifting the mindset and the understanding of learning is really where we're focusing. And so that is a whirlwind trip through my journey, and hopefully some of my learnings and experiences have either encouraged you or inspired you or caused you to think a little bit about your own journey. And with that, I would love to engage.
That was awesome, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, quite a story distilled in a short amount of time. Super appreciative of that. Yeah. So anyone think of questions? You can type them into the chat. Kennedy, you want to, or you can raise a hand. Kennedy, you want to go for it?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Chris, and hi, Marco. I just had a question about building a learning culture. You mentioned a few obstacles. How did you go about creating and establishing a learning culture and shifting that mindset at Microsoft?
Well, we're still, deep into that process. I would not say that we have arrived yet. I think having a culture at the company that Satya, you can read about it in his book, and you've probably read articles and stuff like that. It's grounded in growth mindset. I mean, fundamentally, growth mindset, believing that people are malleable, myself and others, is related to learning. Malleable and people can change and be better is a lasting change in behavior. That's learning. So you can't really pull apart or distinguish growth mindset from learning. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're tightly integrated. And so having a culture at the company, just overall culture, it wasn't about learning. It was about the how growth mindset will unlock the potential in every employee, and the curiosity that engages. Having that as a foundation by your CEO in a company-wide effort, it kind of, it's like, it's already there, right? It's just sort of amplifying and building on that and accelerating. How does that then show up in maybe more tangible or tactical ways that look a little bit more like what we would naturally describe as learning?
And Tomomi also shared, so you've spoken on this specifically on Microsoft culture in the past, Chris, and we have an article on that. So Tomomi just shared that as well in the chat for those of you who are curious. I love how you notice that it starts with the leadership, and you focus so heavily on leadership and empower that argument with data to make your point. And so if the way leaders go, everyone else goes, it seems, when it comes to learning. So that's awesome. I also remember when you and I spoke, you mentioned empowering the edges of the organization and how that plays well with Microsoft's matrix-based sort of org structure. Is that something that's required, or is that just at scale that you have? Can you maybe speak to that, how the company is organized beyond just what the leaders believe in?
Yeah, I mean, historically, many of you may have seen kind of the cartoons of all the guns pointed at each other, sort of representing Microsoft as siloed, competitive, separate pieces and chunks. And that, absolutely has been true at this company. And one of the things that we're working to sort of unlearn and move away from. And one of our cultural attributes is one Microsoft, right? Not a bunch of separate things, but one. But the reality, both based on our size, as well as the breadth of businesses that we're in, and the way we're organized, there is all this separateness. And I don't believe, like if I were in charge, which I'm not, but if you gave me a magic wand and said, reorganize Microsoft, like I would not swing the pendulum to have us be all like one, conglomerate, one blob of a company. I think the separateness in the orgs and the businesses and the focus that provides and the different customers and opportunities is a good thing. It needs to be an and, not an or. I wouldn't swing the pendulum all the way that way. But we need to move away from all the separateness and the silos and the lack of collaboration. We just can't build products that way. And so that's part of the reality of not only the size, the geographic distribution, the role distribution, the product and technology distribution that we have. It's all kind of chunked up. But the connections between and the alignment and the coordination and collaboration, it needs to sort of layer on top of being organized and separate. And so that's our reality and at scale. For smaller companies, some level of that probably also exists for you. Maybe not, but if it does, some of these concepts, might carry over to smaller contexts. But fundamentally, I do believe that having a combination of a right-sized, aligned central effort for learning, as well as resources dedicated by the business, sitting closer to the context and the details that they're trying to serve in a coordinated fashion is a better model, because it shows that business, that part of the organization is invested in learning. The relevance of having it be closer to where the work is being done, where the needs are for those roles or for that technology is better. There's goodness to that. But if you go all the way that direction, then there's tons of duplication and lack of coordination and waste. And so how do you find that balance of the right amount of alignment on the things that need to be aligned on, and then the autonomy and the empowerment out to the edges of the organization and within the business, right? It's both edges and within that I think are important. So that's my worldview, and that's I have to operate that way because that's the way I was set up and funded. But as I've operated and figured out how to do it, I actually believe it's the best model. And I do think it can transfer to other contexts.
Got it. Cool. Thank you for that. And so Jasmine had a question. Jasmine, do you want to just ask it from Chris?
Sure. It's more of a personal question, but right now a lot of learning teams are downsized. We're experiencing a lot of layoffs within our niche. And I'm wondering, when Microsoft decided they're going to downsize, and they had seen you as a valuable member of Microsoft, they had brought you in to be the fixer whenever there were broken teams. How did you not let that impact your morale when you were told that you're going to have to compete against 1,000 other people to find a job? Why did you stay at Microsoft at that point?
Well, I mean, so don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say I was like all chipper and happy in that season. It certainly hit my morale, and it was hard. Having gone through the kicked out of the other organization already, I'm like, okay, this feels familiar. I've done this before. So that was helpful to try to stay grounded and centered on like, what am I trying to do here? But to be completely honest with you, like as much as I wouldn't call myself an expert in change management, but I know a bit, and I love helping people through change. I don't like change myself. I mean, nobody likes change, right? You know, and so I'm super change averse. And so part of why I stayed was, you know, simply, and I'm just being super transparent here, like I was scary thinking about going to find another job somewhere else. So I'd rather stay with a company that I know, that I can navigate, and that I, you know, at least attempt that. And, you know, I was open to going somewhere else, but I'm like, rather than just jumping ship right now, let me explore, you know, what else might be available for me here. And I'm certainly glad I did now in retrospect, right? But, you know, to be able to take all of the context and history I have at this company, which wouldn't be unuseful at other companies, but it's certainly mostly useful here. All that historical context I have. So I'm like, that's worth something. That's one of the reasons why it would make sense to stay here. And independent of layoffs, from about 3 years into being at this company, I've had people ask me from that point all the way up until today, how long do you think you're going to stay at Microsoft? And my answer has always been the same. I guess now that I get really closer to my retirement, it starts to change a little bit. But fundamentally, it's like, listen, today I am challenged every day with opportunities and, you know, to make a difference and be an impact, and I learn new things every single day in my job. If those things stopped happening, you know, or I saw that I don't have an opportunity for that moving forward, those would be the considerations that I would take to say, now let me look for somewhere else. But the reality is that if those two things stop being true in one part of this company, there are so many other businesses and parts of this company that I've not ever worked in, where if I went there, it'd be a brand new show, be all new people, new things to learn, new challenges and opportunities. So for me, those two dynamics are the thing that I've always said, those have to be there for me to stay. And they continue to be. And so, so those would be a couple of my thoughts.
Got it. Any other questions? Anybody else has a question for Chris, wants to raise a hand and just speak it up or type it in the chat? And I have one question going back to previously you talked about selling it to leaders and just, you know, kind of making your argument with data and so on. And we often hear when we do a presentation in Technicon, we often hear, this is great and I wish, you know, this could work in my context, but like, how do I sell this up? Like, how do I justify this idea of people learning, being valuable, et cetera, et cetera. So any thoughts on that? Like what particularly resonates? And I love your idea of using data to tell a story. So what are those arcs of stories that you've seen resonate with leaders so that they want to fund programs like this and make it easier to justify existence, basically?
I mean, I think it's a great question. And one of the phrases that I use is sort of the coalition of the willing, meaning of all the people, you could think of it as early adopters if you want to use that model. But of all the leaders that I could be engaging with, there are a set of them that are willing, some more willing than others, but there's willingness there. Given my capacity, right? I have more to do to engage with those people who in turn I hope will impact others around them that they have influence over, right? Teach them how to teach other people how to fish, if you will. So I don't have to, I'm kind of have the luxury, I guess, of not having to go convince leaders who aren't already bought in and willing to be able to experience what you're talking about, right? So, because I have sort of a large enough audience that pretty much all I'm working with are people who've come to me and said, help me. I see a need here. Now, some of them might come with, oh, my scores on our employee surveys have shown that learning is poor for us. So help me fix my learning scores. Their motivation to start with is simply just fix these scores that are low on my thing. I don't want to be read on a scorecard. I'll take that. That's enough of a willingness to show openness. And then as soon as I have conversations about it's not about the score, and look at all these other side benefits of your employees learning and growing and building skills to fuel more innovation and drive business growth. Do you want innovation? Do you want business growth? Are you held accountable for that as a leader? It doesn't take very much at all to shift a leader's mindset from help me fix a score to, oh, there's real actual business value in here. And oh, the employees will thrive and they'll stay longer. I'll retain them, so I don't have to hire new people, like multiple benefits. All right, so that's the conversation I have with people who are willing, but maybe their motivation isn't there. So I would map that conversation to your question, which is what's important to the leaders? What do they care about? And then how can you, I mean, you can't make up data, right? If you don't have data to show what they care about, then like go do some more work, go like get that data. You can't be disingenuous and, you know, because you can make data say things that you want it to say. So you got to be in integrity with the data and the storytelling. But if you understand what's important to the leader, then take the data, put it in a format to tell that story so that you're speaking in their language, what they care about, as opposed to a bunch of L&D speak that, you know, a lot of times when we interact with each other, we use language like that. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a foreign language to me. Speak in business terms, understand, know enough about the organization, do some research on the organization, gather some data. I always go to a leader in a leadership team with their data. And I have the fortunate, you know, I have all the learning data and how they scored and how their direct reports score. So I'm not coming with data from somewhere else that's easy for leaders to say, well, that's other people, but I'm different. We're a snowflake. I mean, yes, you are different and unique, but you're not a snowflake. And by the way, it doesn't really matter. I have your data. Let me show you your data and relate it to the larger set of data in the company and show you how, you know, you're where other people have been. And when we've engaged in this way, their numbers have increased, right? You want to increase your numbers in the way you care about. So that's generally how I approach that situation.
Got it. And thank you for that. And there was a question, there was a couple of conversations on the chat about time. And on one hand, there's that giving people time for learning, both to consume it as well as presumably to create content that is interesting to their coworkers, right? And I remember at one point, your team published a report on what was important for success of learning at Microsoft. And there was like, I think 5 things. And one of them was time as well, right? Like kind of acknowledging the time for learning, giving people that time and space essentially to the learning activities. So how are you thinking about that? What are you seeing in respect with giving people time? Like, is that a dedicated time? Is it encouraged? Like, yeah.
Well, we could have a whole hour-plus conversation on time specifically, and I'd be happy to, you know, to have that, you know, come back and let's have that conversation. But quickly, you know, we spent 2 years trying to figure out how to give employees more time, more dedicated time. Protected time is kind of how we talk about it.
Got it.
And I'm guessing you're building on Gail's question here.
Yeah, exactly.
Touch on some of the stuff. But you know, as I mentioned, more time isn't the answer. Time is necessary, but not sufficient. It's the, you know, again, it's the leadership mindset and the prioritization, et cetera. But also, as it relates to self-directed versus what the business needs versus what we require, which is typically compliance. So those are the 3 buckets of how you might spend your time: required, business need, and then self-directed, pursuing your own passion. And sometimes what you're passionate about overlaps with what the business needs. I'm passionate about AI and machine learning. Oh, and hey, guess what? My organization needs me to build those skills so we can infuse AI into our products. So win, you know, versus I'm passionate about data and that's for a new role. I want to move to a new role. It's not for my business, it's for me. That's okay too. One of the unintended consequences that we've been cognizant of in the time space is, and this is related to, you've probably heard the phrase, you know, Satya says, we want to move away from being know-it-alls and we want to be learn-it-alls. Okay, that phrase and the all in that phrase is, I know all the things. Now I want to learn all the things. It's about the sort of the breadth of things that you're learning. But we want to turn the phrase a little bit, and we're starting to think this way, is to say from know-it-all to learn it all the time. It's not just about all the things, it's about all the time. Always learning. Okay, so, and we think about in the flow of work versus dedicated time. So this gets at the time question a little bit too, because as we focused on creating protected time, which again, I think is necessary, but not sufficient, you could unintentionally create this impression on engineering leaders and people who don't think about learning all the time that I'm only learning when we're doing these protected things, and then it's back to work and back to doing the things here, as opposed to every meeting, every conversation, every code thing that you write, every code review that you're in, every post-mortem that your conversation you're talking about is an opportunity to learn if you have eyes to see it. If your mindset understands what learning really is, as opposed to if you think learning is training, and we set aside dedicated time, and I do training then, again, not an unimportant thing, but that's just the surface of the tip of the iceberg. And so part of the mindset shift around time that we're working on is to say there are certain kinds of learning, deep learning, where you need that focused, uninterrupted time. That kind of learning happens in protected time, combined with, it's not an or, it's an and, combined with every meeting, every conversation, every opportunity to learn. You're learning all the time because of your growth mindset, your learning mindset. And that's, from a time perspective, it's how do you look at every time, all the time. And when we study at Microsoft, the people who score the highest on I have time for learning, who have, I would argue, the way I phrase it, is the most mature learning organizations, they have protected time, a day a month set aside or whatever. And we look at their learning activity that we can measure, and there's no spike on that day compared to every other day, of the week, as opposed to on some organizations that score lower on time, there's huge spikes on those days. So is that a failure? Well, if we take a step back and look at the overall learning level activity, it's 50 to 100% higher than their peer teams. They're always learning, not on that day, every single day. And I asked the leader, like, why do you even have a dedicated protected time day when people aren't doing any more learning on that day than other days? And they said, it's symbolic. It sends a message to our organization that learning is important enough that we would dedicate an entire day. But we understand that what you need to learn, when you need to learn it, how you need to learn it is unique to you. So learn whenever, however you want to, and people are empowered to do that, and they do. So that's kind of the ultimate goal. But there's kind of this crawl, this crawl, walk, run in the maturity level that we need to work with. And we're dealing with teams and leaders across Microsoft that are at every point in that scale. And so part of our strategy is how do we encourage those at the bottom to sort of move to the middle? And then how do we enable the people in the middle to move to the top? How can the people at the top help pull everybody forward? And that's, sort of how I think about it. So again, a lot more I could say about time, but those are a few quick thoughts from me on that.
Got it. Yeah, I heard something about permission, and like being okay almost to use the time that is even more significant than just kind of like checking off, like, yes, there's time allocated for that. So it's more the permission to use it. So yeah.
Well, and of all the things that you could do, when I meet with leadership teams and stuff like that, to like bottom line it for me, right? Like I'm busy. What's the one thing that I need to do, or the top thing that you would suggest? And it's easy. I point to our manager expectations, and I point to the top item here, and I say, if you can only do one thing, model to your team that learning is important by being a learner, right? And I like to use the sort of the analogy of the tree falling in the forest. If no one's there to hear it, did it really happen? If a leader goes off into the forest to learn and doesn't tell anybody about it, did it actually happen? Well, it may have happened, but it's not going to have any impact, right? Leaders need to model learning out loud. They need to tell their team, I'm going to be learning these things, which demonstrates vulnerability. I don't know it all. Then go off and do it, and then come back to your team afterwards and say, I did it, and here's an insight I had, and this resource was really valuable to me. This one was a waste of time, so that was a failure. Don't waste your time on that one. Modeling learning is the number one thing leaders and managers can do, because people follow what they see, not just what they, not what they hear.
That's so true. Awesome. And speaking of time, we're at time.
Yeah.
So, but this was super awesome. Thank you, Chris. Again, great to hear your story outside of the context of, this is just the Microsoft success. And so that was very inspiring. We are looking forward to having more leaders in technical learning and development stand up and share. So if you all know anybody or want to recommend somebody, please do so. You can send it to any of us. So being Chris, Rajan, Jasmine, Tomomi, myself, anyone. It falls into a category of inspiration. Like, I just love hearing your personal story, Chris. So thank you again for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And we'll be publishing an article and a kind of summary of this and a video recording as well. So Tamami is on top of that. So look out for that. And yeah, we have some additional talks coming out in October. So look out for that as well. So thank you all. Great to see everyone.